Hey guys, um, sorry about the slightly late start. Had to just give a quick edit to the description for reasons that I'll get into in a little bit. And I think I'm going to take 2 seconds to repost the link to this. So give me a moment. Yep. No, there's nothing more fun than watching somebody sit there posting, but do that. And on Twitter. All right. All right. So, appreciate the encouragement, Andy. Yeah, definitely lost a few people while I was sitting there silently posting, which is totally fair. I wouldn't sit there and watch somebody do that. Hi, Dave. So yeah, let's. So first of all, for anybody who didn't see this explanation when I posted it elsewhere, Saturday is usually the one day that I never. Well, Saturday and Monday are usually the 2 days that I never do live streams because I don't do it on Mondays, of course, because that's when the new episodes of the show premiere. And I don't do it on Saturdays because that is when I always, or almost always, record the show. And so it seemed kind of ridiculous to be, or whatever. I mean, after I've been doing the show for hours and I'm finally done and I'm sending the files to my video editor, Forrest, and to David Feldman, who's been very generously helping me with the audio editing. And, I'm finally done with the whole thing. I mean, the last thing I want to do is get on, is get right back on, to do YouTube. But I'm doing a rare Saturday live stream this week because normally one of the benefits for patrons is that patrons can watch the episodes, essentially do the online equivalent of sitting in the studio as the episode's being recorded. Because I do a unlisted YouTube live stream of the Zoom call where I'm recording the episode. And so then, patrons can watch live, or they can watch it as it's, they can watch it at any time in between, of course, because they can go back and watch the stream, so they get early access. Hey, Wesley. Actually, that's something funny that reminds me of, but I will get to that in a moment. But this week I couldn't do that because the way that it just worked out, I had to pre-record the entire episode yesterday. Sometimes I'll pre-record a segment, and then I'll just play the video of that segment for patrons while we're recording the rest of the episode. But this week I had to pre-record the entire thing because both guests and David Griscom all had time conflicts on Saturday afternoon. But it's going to be a good episode. Was a good episode, right? It's going to be a good episode when you guys get to watch it, which if you're a patron, the second it's all stitched together, which might even be sometime tonight, I'll obviously post an unlisted link for patrons. But obviously it's going to go out the same time it always goes out for everybody else. So that is to say, generally by the end of Sunday night on the podcast, to all the usual podcast places, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, all of those. And it always premieres at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Monday for YouTube, which is how most people consume it. Or, I mean, the lowest traffic episodes, it's about even, but usually it's most people consume it on YouTube. This episode is good stuff. It is Adam Proctor, who used to be my co-host on the Dead Pundit Society, and we sound like a band, where I'm talking about like like I was, like I'm Ozzy Osbourne post Black Sabbath or something. But I went off to pursue my solo career, but Adam is still a very good friend and comrade. And one of the people that I most enjoy talking to about politics and whose instincts I most trust. And so I had a long conversation with him kind of about the aftermath of the election and the prospects for the left and where we go from here, which actually ended up being being really good because. Well, I mean, it's always good. Like I said, I always really appreciate his insight, and he's a funny guy, and and an insightful guy. But also, I was a fan, of the Dead Pundit Society for a long time before my brief stint as a co-host, and then he got, he got pretty burnt out for a variety of reasons he talks about in some of the stuff that he's put out in the last week or two. And and I was focusing on this thing, so we went our separate ways, but he's like, I'm a big fan of Adam Proctor and was for a long time before my brief stint co-hosting the Dead Pundit Society. And it was really good to talk to him about it because, I know that I'm not going to get, I know that I'm not going to get, I was laughing at the chat, at mindless optimism from Adam. He's not going to do the Baghdad Bob thing and say that the American tanks aren't in the street if they are. So it was really good because by the end of the conversation, he actually kind of brought me around to feeling much more politically optimistic than I had at the beginning of the conversation. We talked about a lot of different things. How leftists who believe in good stuff like socialist internationalism should think about the symbols of American patriotism. And while we were talking about that, we were talking about Michael Harrington, founder of the DSA, who's somebody I obviously don't agree with about everything. I think that he had some bad positions on certain issues. Certainly, certainly he didn't support like a one-state solution to Israel-Palestine like I do. But he's a very insightful thinker and somebody I've really enjoyed reading. And Harrington has a great line in his book Fragments of a Century. Bhaskar Sankara, my co-author for an upcoming book, and my editor at Jacobin, always likes to quote this Harrington line on the 4th of July, where Harrington talks about how it was as a socialist that he came to love the country, and by that he's not saying anything sort of stupid and sentimental, but he's talking about the potential of the society to be remade in a much more worthwhile way. And he says if the left wants to change the country because we hate it, then people will dismiss us, and they'll be right to dismiss us. To be a socialist is to see the seed beneath the snow. And so we were talking about that in the context of talking about patriotism and internationalism. But Adam had a good Adam had like some good perspective in that conversation about how it's easy to feel, and I kind of left my conversations with Matt Chrisman and Glenn Greenwald the day before feeling a little bit like this. Even though I was kind of on that high from, wow, Glenn Greenwald has been one of my heroes since like 2008, so it was amazing to talk to him. But also, both Glenn and Matt, in different ways, had a lot of pessimism about what was going forward, and that was really striking some chords with me. And I still think that some of the analytic points they made were right, but I think that Adam had like a really good perspective about how, even though the Anglo-American left has certainly suffered some serious defeats with Bernie and Corbyn, and in a lot of ways the political atmosphere in the next few years could be very bad for us because the combination of a Biden administration and what's very likely going to be a GOP-controlled Senate. If you live in Georgia, do hold your nose and vote for Ossoff, not because Ossoff doesn't suck, of course he does, but because I was tweeting about this earlier. Why would you give the centrists the gift of a GOP-controlled Senate as a free pass to excuse everything that Biden does in the next few years? Oh, what could he do? He didn't have the Senate. But look, if Biden does have a GOP-controlled Senate, then for that exact reason, right, that's going to be very, very bad for us because we want to fight the Biden administration from the left and talk about how it's fundamentally centrist and pro-business and terrible, and continuing a basically imperial project, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all of which is going to be 100% true. But it's going to be very hard if there is going to be a GOP Senate, because that means that we're going to get every condescending liberal in the world explaining, yeah, of course, you should vote for Warnock too. If you're going to vote for Ossoff, obviously you'd vote for Warnock. But then every annoying centrist in the world is going to say, oh, look at these foolish leftists who don't understand how the process works. They're blaming Biden. But really, we smart, clued in people understand that he can't do anything because he doesn't have, he doesn't have the Senate. So of course he has to appoint, the shittiest possible centrists to cabinet positions instead of more progressive Democrats. Of course he has to do this, that, and the other thing. Of course he couldn't do a public option. Of course he couldn't do card check, and that's going to be awful. But I think that the point that actually, that's a really interesting question in the chat, but I just want to wrap up the thought, about the conversation with Adam first, right? Of course, so that would just be a very bad situation for us, because as annoying and wrong as that take is going to be, and as much as, I was talking, I was emailing with Megan Day about this, that, people like her and me are probably going to get sick of writing articles in Jacobin explaining all the things that Biden could be doing, even with Republican Senate, that he's not doing, and everybody's going to get sick of reading them. But, it's going to be a very bad situation for it, because, well, of course it's good, right? I'm happy to write those articles to arm the left with the talking points about what could, so they can respond to these people. But the problem is that's a very uphill battle for us rhetorically. That's going to be very that's going to be a very heavy lift, to convince people of that, because it just sounds right. It has the ring of truth and world-weary wisdom. Of course, what could he do? He has the GOP Senate. So I was feeling very pessimistic, but I think Adam had a good perspective that he brought to it about how we suffered these setbacks, of course, Bernie, Corbyn, etc. But that doesn't mean that the soil isn't just as fertile for our politics as it was 2 years ago. People have all the same material needs that aren't being met by anything that's happening within the neoliberal paradigm, and also certainly aren't going to be met by the pseudo-populist right-wing hucksters of the Trump, Josh Hawley, Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon variety. So there are going to continue to be these deep openings for socialist politics, and I think he's right, and really made me feel much better about it. After the conversation with Adam, I talked to Daniel Bessner about an article that he just wrote for Jacobin called "The General Who Brought Down the American Empire," about these Millennium Challenge war games in 2002. Where there was an unnamed Middle Eastern country, basically Iran, that was fighting the U.S. And basically the general who was assigned to be Iran, the leader of Iran, started winning by using guerrilla warfare tactics, and they had to cheat, to beat him. And what that really showed about the ridiculousness of the overconfidence of this belief that new high-tech weapon really means that we can fight wars without serious costs anymore. So good conversation. And of course, the Outlaws and Revolutionaries with David Griscom, is always great. I love talking to David, working with David. So really looking forward to that episode coming out. Also talked to, recorded this last week, a patron exclusive episode, which still needs to be edited and put out for patrons, with Jesse Single from the Blotch and Recorded podcast, which was good. Covered a lot of interesting subjects. I like Jesse. He's just a social democrat. He doesn't understand. I have yet to sell him on smashing capitalism, but I still like him. He's a thoughtful and funny guy. And of course, in this last week, we finally did that first Sopranos recap bonus episode with Big Waz and Nando Vila and Mike Racine, which was obviously and predictably tons of fun. So, which reminds me, somebody says in the chat. Well, actually, there are two things. So I'll get to I'll do the Sopranos one is more fun, so I'll save that for the second one. Yeah, if you have any questions, obviously super chats go to the front of the line, but I'll try to answer as many questions as possible. Going to have to leave before 6:30 for reasons I will get into. 255 AD asks, suppose some kind of designated survivor situation put a left-wing person in the White House. Would you want them to do a load of socialist stuff even though they'd have no mandate to? Yeah, right. I would, and there are a couple reasons why. Right. So I mean, presumably a load of socialist stuff is a little bit, it's a little bit vague, right? What are we talking about? Are we talking Medicare for all? Are we talking a Green New Deal? Are we talking workers' control of the means of production? And I think that, yeah, and he adds, or try to, and that's an important addition. So this gets into the second of my two reasons for saying yes. My first reason for saying yes is that lots of those things actually have majority support, even though they're not reflected in the electoral process. That's the case for lots of reasons, going from the fact that we have these hideously anti-democratic institutions like the Senate, and the Supreme Court, Jesus, but to the fact, yeah, Fed chair Yanis Varoufakis, I'm all for it. To the fact that lots of people just don't believe that they can accomplish, like, many more people want those things than actually believe that they can be accomplished through the political process. There's widespread and entirely understandable cynicism about that. This is one of those reasons why it's so frustrating when centrists say, oh, but people don't vote on the basis of economic stuff, because look at people who are poor who maybe voted for a Republican in some election where the Democrat wanted to have a 5% increase in benefits and something, right? It's like, look, if people start out not believing that any good stuff that politicians say is going to happen because they've been burned so many times before, because it's just there's nothing in their lives or in their experiences to make them think. Fed chair Richard Wolff. All right, that one's even better. Absolutely. It's a lame joke, but I'll repeat it here. I've always said, that if you're a leftist and you're thinking about going to graduate school, don't go to graduate school in English literature or, even philosophy like I did, or history, because we've got lots and lots and lots of radical leftists who've done those things. Go to grad school in economics. If you can survive it with your sanity and convictions intact, you can do really good public work. We need this is the lame joke, we need a whole pack of wolves, right, as in Richard Wolff. Yeah, I didn't go to Rutgers, but my wife and I were adjuncts there for 3.5 years. You can watch an old TMBS segment where I talked to Michael Brooks about the working conditions there and everything. But it was a great department. I love that department. But obviously, the adjunctification of academia, it's a very small part of this. It's the part that relates to academia of the new neoliberal hellscape, the Uberization of everything we're all living in. Like I said, it's great. It's a great department. So that's one reason that a lot of those things that, lots of people don't vote for the candidates who are most talking about it because they just don't take it seriously, right? It's like Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, that there are lots of stuff he was running on that people liked, but they didn't believe. You give them what came off to them as this sprawling Christmas wish list of good demands, and they'd say, thank you so much for the super chat, torches and pitchforks. Yeah, for Michael Jamal Brooks. Word to that. Sorry. Sorry, that actually got me for a second. But anyway, look, so that's the, if they don't believe that, right? They don't believe that you're actually going to nationalize this, that, and the other thing, because that just sounds like hot air from politicians. So they think, look, whether Brexit happens or not, that sounds real. So they'll vote based on that. And there's a lot of that similar kind of dynamic that happens in the US. Most obviously, something that I am Oh yeah, John Ross asks, whenever this pandemic eventually ends, what's the future of GTAA? Will you eventually go to a conventional studio or continue to broadcast from home? Yeah, there are no more Michael Brooks. I'm sorry, you gotta get that out of your head. There was only one of those. So yeah, look, I mean, might move to a conventional studio at some point. I mean, we'll just see, right? I mean, it depends where I am. It depends where the Patreon's at. A lot of other things. But yeah, I mean, I think that might be fun to move into an actual studio. I mean, in some ways, I often think that I got lucky in a horrible sort of way, started this during the pandemic, because right now, even most shows that would normally be in studios are in are just being broadcast from people's homes. So hey, mine looks no worse than anybody else's. Actually, looks better than a lot of them. At least there are books and a plant back there. Uh, nice, appreciate that. 49 hamburger. Um, yeah. Some Daniel says Glenn Greenwald and Gene Bajelon, so both have been guests. Gene has been a frequent guest. Glenn was obviously in the last episode. Seems to differ on how bad the administration has been in terms of imperialism, with Greenwald seen as a continuation, Bajelon seen as much worse. All right, I'm going to answer that, but first my dog is whining at the door, so give me half a second. All right, come on, Lucy. All right. Yeah, I mean, I think there might be some difference there, although, I mean, I think the idea of a debate between them would be really interesting. They're both really smart, really thoughtful people. I'm sure it'd be a great debate. I'm not sure how much difference they actually have on that. During my conversation with Glenn, can't show the dog. She's on the other side of the room. But Lucy, she's a schnauzer. I've posted a bunch of pictures of her on Twitter and stuff. I've totally become a ridiculous dog person. Yeah, see, at least they're real books, not that like background books by the foot thing. But look, I'm not sure how much difference there actually is between Glenn and Gene on this point. When I interviewed Glenn, we talked about this a little bit, and he agreed that Trump has done a lot of very neoconish things in office, and a lot of things that those guys would like, right? Even though a lot of them became never Trumpers, like tearing up the Iran deal and doubling the rate of drone strikes in Yemen. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I mean, I think that might mostly be a matter of emphasis, but I'm not sure. They both have to speak for themselves. Anyway, big fan of both of those guys. Thank you again for the super chat. Torches and Pitchforks says, I like dogs more than I like most people, Ben. Well, I'm with you there, and I actually like most people, as cranky as I might sometimes seem about some subjects. I mean, I even like most people I disagree with politically. I mean, usually, put me in a studio with somebody and to debate them, and beforehand we just have a completely normal and happy human conversation. Yeah. Oh yeah, people are always misgendering our pets because the male cat, is kind of small and delicate looking, and the female dog has a big bushy beard that, as my little brother once put it, looks like something like a 19th century. He said full-on 19th century maritime beard, like something you'd see on the side of a can of sardines. Yeah, I wouldn't steal Sam's studio if nothing else. It'd make me feel too weird after all the times I was in there for TMBS. But anyway, right. So I never completely answered the question about like if there was some weird designated survivor situation. So a leftist got into the presidency by some weird path, right? I said I would want them to do a bunch of socialist stuff in there as much as they could for two reasons. One, a lot of it is actually very popular, even if that's not reflected electorally, both because of anti-democratic features of our system, like the Senate and the two-party monopoly, obviously, but also because people just don't take it seriously that they can actually achieve those things through electoral politics. So that's why, for example, even though Biden was technically on record on his campaign website as supporting a $15 minimum wage. A $15 minimum wage resolution won in Florida, which Trump carried, and it won by more than Trump did, making it mathematically impossible. There weren't people who voted for both Trump and the $15 minimum wage. And of course, all the states that Biden beat Bernie in the primaries, the exit polling showed that most Democratic voters supported Medicare for all. So I think the Democratic mandate question is a little bit more complicated than it might look. That's one of the reasons that I'd still want a leftist who came in by some weird yeah, I think that was Matt Christman's line comparing the Biden celebration. I mean, I think that's why he was, I like Matt a lot. You can go back and watch our previous interviews. He's been very relaxed and happy. I think that's why he might have been a little on edge during that last one, because, where he lives in, Brooklyn, people outside were celebrating, as he said elsewhere, as if it were the Ewoks on Endor for Biden winning, and you can see how he would be cranky about that. But in any case, right? So that's one of the reasons why the mandate question is tricky. The other thing, though, is that, look, you couldn't actually achieve any of those things without overwhelming majority support. Even if Bernie Sanders were elected president, it just happened the normal way. He won the primaries, then he won the general election. That would be a necessary condition for getting stuff like Medicare for all, but it wouldn't be a sufficient one. That's what Bernie was talking about when he originally started talking about a political revolution, having this massive, unprecedented, destabilizing level of grassroots mobilization to support him getting through his program, because that's the only way it would ever happen. So I'm not worried that there's some, like, in that weird designated survivor thought experiment, I'm not worried about having about the idea that meant that, like, somehow it would be undemocratic that leftist president got through a bunch of left policy items, because I think the only path to getting all those things through would be a mass majoritarian political revolution anyway. So that's a long-winded answer to that question. The question I said I would save for after that was whether I'd have Stavros from Cumtown on one of the Sopranos episodes. And yeah, that'd be fun. I actually remember I thought about that many times. One of the last episodes that Michael did, I believe, because I remember at one point in it they were talking about the Harper's letter, so that would have been like June. That I think, I don't know, I might be getting my times mixed up, but it was with anyway. That Michael had Stavros on. I remember Stavros was talking in there about how his daily routine was that he would just stop doing all of his work things at a certain point in the day, so he could start, getting high and barbecuing and watching The Sopranos. And I remember listening to that and thinking, Jesus, that sounds good. How can I arrange my life so I could do that instead of having stuff that I feel like is always kind of on the burner and I'm going, back and forth doing all the time. So, but anyway, yeah, I think he would be a fun person to bring on to a Sopranos episode. That's a good idea. I'll ask him sometime. John asks, read any Stephen King lately? Not lately. I think the last Stephen King novel that I actually read when it came out, or not when it came out, but whatever, in order of publication, right? The most recently published Stephen King novel I read was Requiem, I think it's called. Actually, I'm going to look that up real quick. Oh, Revival. Sorry, I knew it was an R word. Revival. Yeah, just to be 100% sure. Revival, Stephen King. Yeah. Which is from 2014. So I guess it's been a while. Yeah, probably more verbal than spatial, I think. Small but good, really. I thought Revival was actually pretty long. I'm actually curious about that now. So yeah, Revival is this 2014 Stephen King novel. It's okay. I guess it's short for Stephen King. It's 405 pages. Yeah, I want to read The Deficit Myth at some point. Like, I am interested in learning more about MMT, and I'm critical of certain kinds of MMT framings and talking points, but that doesn't mean I don't think there's anything there. And I've actually thought for a while that once I get a chance to read the book, I should ask Stephanie Kelton if she wants to be on the podcast sometime. I think that'd be an interesting conversation. McMindfulness, who moved my cheese? Ooh, thank you for the very generous super chat. That's great. Says, how about some Jets Pizza, Ben? I hear good things. Why do objectivists hate Kant so much? And Torches and Pitchforks, thank you for the super chat. Says, the Institute was great. 2-day page turner. Okay, I've not read the Institute. That was a follow-up to Firestarter. Is that right? I did read Firestarter. Which was good. I like most Stephen King novels a lot. I didn't get very far into the Dark Tower books. I think I got stalled out in like the third one, maybe. Although I should go back to those and give those another chance. But I'm not, I like most Stephen King. I mean, I think he's, in a lot of ways, I think he's a much better writer than people give him credit for. I think that there are. Yeah, I think let's put it this way. I think there's some things as a writer that he's very good at, some things that he's not very good at. Overall, I enjoy him a lot. I think my biggest criticism of him as a writer, if we're going to actually do the like artistic critique thing, I mean, like I said, this is somebody I've gotten a tremendous enjoyment out of reading, is that he's pretty Manichean about morality and about his characters. There's way too much of a clear division between the good people and the bad people. Although the flip side of that is the thing he's actually very good at is interiority, right? Like actually showing like having this like realistic, interesting idea of like the interior consciousness of his protagonists, who are the only people in those books who get to be morally complicated. And look, I mean, there are parts of, I remember like when I read The Shining thinking that there was like a part of that where Jack Torrance is out in the shed and he's promised that he'll look at the snowmobile, try to get it. Okay, Elevation is the small one that John meant. I promise I'll stop talking about Stephen King and go back to politics in like 2 minutes, but just indulge me for 2 minutes. So yeah, there's this scene in there where. And this is not really a spoiler as far as the plot. If you've never read The Shining, you want to. It's a very small part of it, but where this spooky stuff has started happening in the hotel, and Wendy, Jack's wife, has gotten freaked out, and Jack is finally taking it seriously, and he said, "Okay, we'll take. I think it's like this, like a snowmobile or something that they've got that they could use to leave and get to, and get out of the hotel and go into the nearest town." And he's standing there trying to like get it ready. And he's finding like the battery for it, and he starts thinking about how if he goes into the town and his life is going to go downhill because this like job as a caretaker was his big second chance. He just gets started drinking again, and he ends up like dumping the battery out into the snow and lying about it. And I remember reading that and thinking, man, that could be like a little literary short story. I could totally imagine reading that in the New Yorker, or even like a collection of Raymond Carver stories. So again, in some ways, he's a very good writer. Although there's the moral Manichaeanism about the characters. Everybody's either clearly good or clearly bad. Not a fan of that. And also, I mean, let's be honest, he's somebody who could very much use more editing than he gets. Some of those books have hundreds of pages of material that could and probably should be excised. They'd be tighter, better, more interesting books. His son Joe Hill is really interesting as a writer that way, because a lot of ways what he writes is very similar to what his dad writes. But I think Hill is, I don't know, maybe this is actually unfair, because I think Hill's more recent novels have become doorstoppers like his dad's, but some of them at least seemed much more disciplined to me that way. Thank you so much for this, the super sticker, Roy. Really appreciate it, brother. So yeah, I haven't read The Institute. I read Firestarter. I thought that was good. Revival was the one published most recently that I read and I liked. I really enjoyed that book. Like lots of like weird Lovecraftian, cosmology stuff going on in it. Also lots of stuff about classic rock and blues, which I've always been a sucker for. And people like wrestling with religion and losing their religion and the problem of evil and whatever. I'm a philosophy nerd. I like all of that shit. So yeah, I never really answered McMindfulness, whom of my cheese. His super chats question. I'm we were actually talking about Jet's Pizza, like in Lansing, like the actual pizza place. Or I was a little confused if it's like, did Stephen King write something called Jet's Pizza? But anyway, yeah, it's okay. It's not my favorite pizza place. And the other part of the question was, yeah, Giorgio's is actually a pizza place in East Lansing that's like a local institution that I like a lot. They do like weird pizza toppings, but I'm a fan. I saw Katie Herzog bashing Jesse Singal on Twitter for allegedly liking beans on pizza. And I was thinking, oh, they actually have a black bean pizza at Giorgio's that I really like. Why do objectivists hate Kant so much? I think because if they really grappled with Kant, they would have to admit that that the way that they portray all philosophy, basically in between Aristotle and Ayn Rand, like in a weird way, the objectivists, like the way they look at the history of philosophy, is almost like the way that, like one of these like crazy fundamentalist churches where they have church on Saturday and they're Christians but they follow all the Old Testament laws. Will say, oh, in between like the Apostle Paul and like our particular church being founded in the 1950s or whatever, everybody just got Christianity wrong. The objectivists are kind of the same way about the history of philosophy. Really appreciate the super chat, Curtis. Curtis asked in super chat, how do you have the patience and empathy to take libertarians seriously? I mean, look, this might just get some of the, I mean, look, some of this is I've always been an argumentative person. In some contexts, it's a character flaw, but people seem to enjoy it on YouTube. But look, I mean, I find libertarianism weirdly fascinating. I think they're wrong, like very, very wrong. But like I find myself sort of weirdly fascinated with how anybody comes to believe it. So the combination of that and the argumentativeness and whatever. I mean, also just like all the years teaching intro to philosophy classes, right? Like I love my students, but like, people at intro to philosophy classes will say some pretty weird things. And so one of the first, and that's not a slam, right? I'm not dunking on intro students. That's just like, if you're starting to think about these issues for the first time in your life and you're thinking out loud about some of them, some weird stuff's going to come out of your mouth. So like, you have to kind of develop the skill of being like, okay, that's interesting. What do you mean by that? Let's think more about it. And so I think some of that translates. Sorry, 49 Hamburger. Did I forget your question? Can you ask it again? Can you remind me? But boo. Disagree, JJ. Disagree. I like Revival a lot. But look, objectivists, right? In other words, the followers of Ayn Rand are very weird about the history of philosophy in this way that's kind of similar to those fundamentalist sects that I was talking about. That they have they've got sort of this view that, okay, they like Aristotle, that they think Aristotle was good, but they basically think in between Aristotle and Ayn Rand, everybody got everything wrong. And in particular, they think in between Aristotle and Ayn Rand, everybody was a altruist. And if you read Ayn Rand, like she has this book, The Virtue of Selfishness, I was reading some of to get ready for that Yarn Brook debate, whenever that was like episode 4, I think. Oh yeah, bodily autonomy. That's a good reminder. I think you asked during the last live stream where I was taking questions, and I didn't answer it. So anyway, but look, they so Ayn Rand had this ridiculous cartoon caricature of what she said altruists believe, right? That altruists believe that any action is good as long as the intention is to help people, and any action is bad if the intention is to help yourself rather than other people, which is a bizarre straw man. Literally nobody in the history of philosophy thinks that. I mean, maybe some strands of fundamentalist religiosity veer close to that. But even there, I mean, no fundamentalist religious person will say just whatever you do is good if you had good intentions. That's not a view anybody actually holds. And certainly, like, nobody outside of maybe some fundamentalist, really extreme religious people who are obsessed with original sin. Certainly, nobody else in the history of philosophy thinks that you have it's sinful or wrong or bad in itself to try to do things for yourself or to look out for your own life, your own loved ones, your own career. Nobody thinks that, right? But they attribute that to like everybody in the history of philosophy except Aristotle and Ayn Rand, practically. Yeah, I mean, Rand actually was pretty critical of Nietzsche, but I think Nietzsche was a much more interesting thinker than Ayn Rand, to put it mildly. But yeah, so of course, right? Nobody thinks good intentions are enough, right? Which again, it's not the objectivists think that. The objectivists strawman everybody else is thinking that. And the objectivist strawman everybody else is thinking that you only have duties to other people. You don't have any duties to yourself. And in fact, it's wrong to do things for yourself. Complete bullshit. And one of the biggest signs that it's complete bullshit is if you read like John Stuart Mill or Jeremy Bentham or modern utilitarians like Peter Singer, no utilitarian thinks that you don't have any duties to yourself, or that that like you should just always be denying yourself for the sake of other people. Utilitarians say that your happiness and your suffering count just as much as anybody else's happiness or suffering. And in terms of like the most important alternative tradition, Kantianism, Kant clearly thinks that you have moral duties to yourself. If you read the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals, which is if you ever took an ethics class in college where you read Kant, that's most likely what you read, that or an extract from that. And in there, he gives 4 examples of people who violate his moral system, the categorical imperative, and 2 of the 4 are about people violating their duties to themselves. One of them's the guy who commits suicide because he's grown weary of life and he thinks that he's just going to have more pain. And the other one is the person who doesn't develop his talents. Kant thinks both of those things are morally wrong. And I'm not saying that to endorse Kant or anything like that. I could give you my whole hot take on Kant and, what Kant got right and what Kant got wrong. That'd be an interesting conversation. But as far as the super chat question about Ayn Rand and objectivism, the problem with but the problem with the way that objectivists talk about Ayn Rand, the way objectivists talk about Kant, is that Kant, they want to stereotype, they want to strawman Kant as thinking you only have duties to other people and you should always deny himself. But again, 2 of his 4 examples of people doing things morally wrong or violating duties to themselves. He clearly thinks you have duty to yourself, fulfill your potential, develop your talents. He just also thinks you have duties to other people. And I think in particular, the reason that objectivists hate Kant is because part of it's just like sort of sloppy misreading, that they think that what he's saying with the categorical imperative is just the golden rule. So they think it's basically just Christian morality, but it's not, right? There's actually an important difference there. We can talk about that. But the other reason is that they make such a big deal about how, that this is just from pure rationality gives you Ayn Rand's ethics. That's their big claim. And of course, Kant has very similar rhetoric about his own moral system, but he clearly believes in duties to other people. So you can kind of see how they'd end up hating him. So again, I guess that's a long-winded answer to the why do objectivists hate Kant question. I can talk about what I think about Kant in a second, but first, I just got confirmation. Speaking of Ayn Rand, I'm going to be debating somebody who likes Ayn Rand a lot more than I do right here on the stream tomorrow at 5 Eastern, I believe. That would be blanked out for a second. So anyway, that would be my buddy Nick Manley, who is a good guy. I disagree with him profoundly politically. He's kind of a left libertarian. He has an idiosyncratic combination of views that, he thinks of himself as a critic of capitalism, but he thinks that if we had he's one of the writers for there's a website called, I guess it's a think tank. I think of it as a website, Center for a Stateless Society, which is they call themselves left market anarchists. hold on just a second. I have to let the dog out again. All right. So, anyway, so suffice to say, he's not like one of the typical right-wing libertarians I usually debate, but he does think that there's something of value in Ayn Rand's philosophy. I do not. So we are going to be debating that tomorrow at 5 Eastern. Look forward to that. Yeah, I think it's a little inaccurate to say that Nietzsche thought that, might makes right. I think that Nietzsche definitely had a critique of what he thought was that sort of like self-abnegating morality of that he associated with Christianity. But I don't think it's quite right to say, like sometimes people have this idea that when Nietzsche called Christianity slave morality, that he wanted to go back to like the master morality of paganism. And that's not really what he said, right? What he said was that there are certain things that there's certain insights we only see because of that slave morality, and what we need is to sort of transcend both and have some higher, new, better value system, about which I think, to be honest, he was extremely vague, right? Like there's a lot of stuff in there. Yeah, Lucy, my schnauzer, I think I actually have shown her on the stream once or twice before, but I'll do it again. Don't worry. So I think that they sort of like, and remember that book called The Will to Power, that's not anything he published. That's something his horrible Nazi sister sort of cobbled together from scraps of unpublished manuscripts. And so, again, I think that this higher value system that he thought, instead of moving backwards back to sort of master morality, we need to move forward to this higher value system. I think the better critique of Nietzsche is not that like the fascists who love Nietzsche are reading him correctly. I think the better critique of Nietzsche is that he's just incredibly vague about what these new higher values will be, and it's very unhelpful. So yeah, sorry. So you wanted my take on Kant. So my take on Kant is basically this. Lucy's back. What's up? Hey, Lucy, come on. Lucy, come on. Yeah. Okay. There you go. By popular demand, here is Lucy the Schnauzer. Oh, wow. Okay, Wesley in the chat says I should do a small segment on how Ayn Rand was commissioned by the State Department to help make a script for a propaganda movie about the dropping of the A-bomb. That's crazy. I never heard that before. Huh. So anyway, sorry, I was going to say about Kant, right? So before we do Kant, we should talk about Hume, because I can't give my Kant take without talking about Hume. Oh yeah, I think a lot of Zarathustra is Nietzsche sniping at contemporaries. So before I do a whole thing about Hume and Kant and the metaphysics of morality, best dog ever. I do want to talk about something completely unrelated and something that's a little bit self-indulgent, but hey, it's my YouTube stream. I'm going to do the slightly self-indulgent. Oliver and Adelson in chat says synthetic a priori knowledge goes brr. So yeah, look, before I go into all of that, I do want to just self-indulgently do a plug, not for, I'm sorry, 49 Hamburger. There's a lot going on in the chat. I keep missing your question. It has something to do with Tragedy of the Commons. Super chats, like they've got the little thing around them so they stand out. Not saying you have to do that, but anyway, I did honestly miss it both times. My apologies. In any case, a small plug, not for myself, but actually for my younger brother David Burgis, who I've mentioned before. Works in the entertainment industry. In fact, his current day job is he's the art director for Robot Chicken. He has he and some other people made stop motion animation short that's in an online film festival. It's the BMC, Black Magic Collective Film Festival. I don't know if it was supposed to be online originally or they just put it online because of the pandemic, but in any case, the block of shorts that his is in is at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time, so I'm going to be getting off just before that so I can watch it. And also there's some sort of audience choice award you can vote on if you watch it. So I actually put the links both on Eventbrite and the Facebook page for where you can watch the festival live. That's at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time. I think a lot of it says 3:30, but that's because it's West Coast. If you want to see Dave's short film, stop motion film, it's called No Monsters Allowed, and vote on that. So, like I said, self-indulgent, but there you go. Let's see. Yeah, that is a disturbing bit of trivia about the Ayn Rand and the atomic bomb, and also really goes to the bizarreness of Rand's version of libertarianism, that she kind of supported the war in Vietnam, or at least she didn't want to withdraw because she said that would be capitulating to communism. She rationalized the dispossession of the Native Americans and Israel's dispossession of the Palestinians. And, a lot of that stuff seems pretty damn unlibertarian to me. Not that she used that word to describe herself, but as somebody who made a big deal about freedom and being opposed to force, that those are some pretty funky positions. But anyway, yeah, Automatic for the People is a good album. I like it. Appreciate that, Miss Heathen. I don't know why I feel weird about it. I guess it's just so far off topic, but anyway, I'm very proud of him. So please do check out his film. Yeah. So a few minutes about Hume, Kant, and morality. Here's my hot takery about that. So one of Hume's big points, and this is a point that I talk a lot about in my first book, Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left, that is something Ayn Rand and John Locke have in common. Is that Hume, like one of Hume's big insights was about what's sometimes called the fact-value gap or the is-ought gap, that there's no way, like, which I was kind of trying to use in the book to explain what's wrong with the facts don't care about your feelings crowd, because the idea when people like Ben Shapiro say facts don't care about your feelings, what they're trying to suggest is that they, good, rational conservatives, libertarians, whatever, in various cases, they're somehow deriving their moral and political conclusions, their values, directly from the facts, right? Which is what good, hard-headed, rational people do. Whereas, fuzzy-headed leftists, who are overly emotional, derive their political and moral commitments from their feelings. But of course, if you've read your Hume, you know that this is just kind of incoherent, because there's no way to go from the facts, or if you're a hardcore moral realist, maybe you believe that there's some strong sense in which there are moral facts. You could be like a quasi-realist and think there's a sense in which there are moral facts. This is probably way too in the weeds for the live stream. Yes, thank you. I'm not going to forget the bodily autonomy thing. We'll do that after. The tragedy of the commons thing, I think, is what 49 Hamburger keeps posting. And I actually can't speak to that in any kind of depth, except basically to say this, that the idea that things that are held in common, like commons area, that like anybody in a community can use, that everybody is just going to be totally self-interested, so they're just going to recklessly use it and use it all up. That's roughly the idea of tragedy of the commons. And I think the basic problem with that is empirical, that if you actually look at the history of commons, is that doesn't actually happen, right? It's just a priori idea about what people think will happen. So anyway, I think that's my best answer to that. I'm sorry, I know, long delay for me to give a very simple and maybe not very helpful answer, but there we go. I'm going to do the bodily autonomy thing right after this, right? Wow, I'm missing some drama here. Why does Oliver hate you? Oh, about a priori synthetic. Okay, anyway, whatever. So So you can't go from the non-moral facts to normative conclusions. Thank you very much, Michael Tillotson, for the generous super chat. I will definitely answer that. I'm going to read it out loud now before I do the human Kant thing, just to make sure it doesn't get lost. Michael's question was, do leftists lack a software technical infrastructure? We tend to associate tech with Silicon Valley Bitcoin bros, but the internet may be our greatest advantage. Efforts towards social media, data analysis, website support are new tools altogether. Great question. I don't know how much I have to say about it, but I will speak to that before we end here, I promise. Yeah, I hope Substack isn't the future of journalism, and I'm somebody who subscribes to multiple Substacks. I subscribe to Greenwald, I subscribe to Taibbi, probably one or two others I'm not thinking of right now, but definitely at least those two, because those are both guys I admire and I want to support them. But I don't know who the tallest great philosopher is. The tallest contemporary philosopher is Mark Warren, who was on my election stream. Jesus, Joe Biden is considering Hillary Clinton for UN ambassador. That's grim. So I think those guys are great, but I'm disturbed by them basically, whatever combination you think it is of them, again, I've laid my cards down on the table. I'm a fan of both of them, but even if you dislike them, you think that they're, being overly sensitive about, the sort of pressures they might get at various journalistic institutions, or whether you're more sympathetic to them than I do, whatever that dynamic is, right? If that dynamic leads to those guys being segregated off from the rest of the media onto these little Substacks, I don't like that, mostly because it means that fewer people are going to read them, right? So that's why I hope it's not the future of journalism. I don't want Bernie to be the Secretary of Labor. If Biden was smarter, he would make Bernie the Secretary of Labor, because that would be a good way to politically neutralize him. I want Bernie in the Senate to lead the left opposition to the Biden administration. Yeah, I have mixed feelings about the social media thing. I have not forgotten Michael Tillotson's question. But in any case, right? So this is a point that Hume makes very forcefully, right? You can't go. This is the problem. Like when some conservatives will say, "Oh, science tells us that abortion is wrong because science tells us that a fetus is a human life." Say, yeah, but that, like, science can tell you that a fetus is genetically human and check some of the marks check some of the boxes for biological processes, but it can't tell you whether those things are sufficient for having moral rights, like a right to life, or certainly, to preview the question we're going to get to in a minute, such a powerful right to life that it overrides a pregnant woman's right to basic bodily autonomy. Those are moral questions. Science can't tell you the answer. So Kant, who read his Hume and was very influenced by him, although he has a very different perspective on morality in some ways, but he agrees with him about the fact-value thing. Kant says, uses an example in the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals, where he says, look, the very same medical science that can tell a doctor how to save somebody's life can also tell them how to poison them. So if you're in a situation, maybe even how to poison them so you can get away with it. Nobody will know you did it. So if you're in that situation, like the one Glenn Greenwald raised in my interview with him, you can see the segment. It's called "No, Glenn Greenwald is not a right winger now." I think Kelly posted it on the YouTube channel last night. Oh yeah, Sam Harris is deeply ignorant about this stuff. I've got an article, and I think the first thing I ever published actually in Arc Digital Media is called "The Problem with Sam Harris's Moral Theory." Basically, Sam Harris doesn't have a good response to anything I'm saying because he doesn't understand what Hume is talking about when he says that you can't derive values from facts. Harris says, "Oh, science can tell you what's going to lead to flourishing, and whatever leads to flourishing is morally good. Science can tell you what leads to flourishing. Therefore, the sort of facts that are studied by science can actually be used to derive moral values." But he's just skipping the part that all the philosophical controversy is about, which is that he's just assuming utilitarianism about ethics. I'm embarrassed for him that he says things like this. Sam Harris is, and I cannot put this? Sam Harris, he's a very smooth speaker. In some ways, he's a good writer, but philosophically, he's a complete idiot. It just spouts nonsense. He has no idea what he's talking about. He doesn't address basic points. They're wild logical leaps. He doesn't bother to read the literature to find out what people who know more and are smarter than him have said about this. Do not, for any reason, listen to Sam Harris about any subject. So look, if you're in that situation like Glenn Greenwald's talking about, right? You're a doctor at the hospital where Bolsonaro has just shown up, after the stabbing, and you're trying to decide, should I save him because I'm a doctor and I took an oath to save him, or should I let him die and maybe even use my medical knowledge to get away with it better because this guy's a fascist and he could do tremendous damage. However you answer that moral dilemma, science can't tell you, right? The medical science can tell you how to achieve either goal. It can't tell you. It can't tell you which course of action you should engage in the first place, because those are moral questions, not scientific questions. Now, Kant thinks that even though Kant agrees with Hume, you can't derive morality from the non-moral facts. Kant still thinks that, like, reason itself, what he called, that practical reason, pure practical reason, can tell you the answer to these moral questions. That anybody who comes to any conclusion other than the categorical imperative is just being irrational. And I think that's wrong, right? I'm very unpersuaded by that. If you're not familiar with this, here's Kantian ethics in 2 minutes. I'm not going to do it justice because you can't do it justice in 2 minutes. But here are a couple of really basic things. When he says categorical imperative, he means yes, Bolsonaro. I'll never get tired of that clip. So categorical imperative is supposed to be as opposed to a hypothetical imperative. It's a hypothetical imperative is an imperative that only applies to you if you have some goal. So, like, if you want to go to law school, you should take an LSAT prep course as a hypothetical imperative. If you don't want to go to law school, that would be a weird waste of your time. The force of the should is because you happen to have the goal. Kant's categorical imperative is a categorical imperative. It's an imperative that's not hypothetical. It's not tied to some particular goal that maybe you care about, maybe you don't. It only applies to you if you care about that goal. It's supposed to just apply to everybody across the board, regardless of their goals. And he thinks that there's only one categorical imperative, is that the rest of morality follows from the categorical imperative. Although confusingly, he gives a couple of different versions of it that sound like very different moral rules. So the first one is that you should only act on that maxim that you could will to be a universal law, which is the one that Nietzsche, who I was saying nice things about earlier, but he completely flubs this. Nietzsche thinks that this is just the golden rule in disguise. It's not. That's a misreading. It's sloppy. What this is Kant sees it as a test of consistency. Would it be? It's not that you should only act on that maxim that you would will to be a universal law. It's not only do things you would want everybody to do. It's only do things that if everybody did it, that would be consistent with your reason for doing it in the first place. So the reason Kant thinks that lying is wrong, or at least as explained with that version of the categorical imperative, is that if you are lying to somebody, you're lying to them to control their that if you're lying to somebody, you're doing them that in the hopes that they believe you, and that you can use that to control their behavior. They'll act in certain ways because they believe you. If she believes that there's an innocent explanation for why I was talking to that girl, then she won't get mad at me and she won't dump me. Or if he believes that I'll be able to pay him back on Friday, he'll give me the money. But the problem is, if everybody lied in these situations, nobody would believe it, and that would undermine your reason for acting that way in the first place. You wouldn't get anything out of lying. So again, I know why it sounds like the golden rule, but it's really, really not. John Stuart Mill, by the way, also sloppily misinterprets Kant. He thinks that it's just rule utilitarianism, that, even Kant is ultimately talking about utility, because would things work out well if everybody did this? Would it have good consequences? That's not what Kant's talking about. Again, it's supposed to be, Kant conceives of this as a test of consistency. Would it be would everybody doing it be consistent with the reasons you're doing it in the first place? Yeah, it would be great if Kant would write like Nietzsche. Nietzsche is about a 10,000 times better writer than Kant is. Kant has some fun lines every now and again. I like the one where he's kind of defending his writing style in the groundwork, where he says that it's that he could say it in a simpler way, but then it wouldn't be philosophy; it would just be coffee house twaddle. I've always liked that. I've quoted that in syllabi. But even though I actually try very hard not to write like Kant, and I actually do like Nietzsche's writing quite a bit. Nietzsche is one of the very few philosophers who's a good enough writer that non-philosophers read them for pleasure. But the other formulation of the categorical imperative, well, there's also some others like the kingdom of ends formulation, but the other main formulation, right, the formula of universal law is the one I just gave. The other main formulation of the categorical imperative is sometimes called the formula of humanity, which is the one that says you should always treat humanity, whether in your own person, right? This is the part that the objectivists are missing in their straw man, whether in your own person or in the person of another, as an end in itself and not merely as a means to an end. I know that's a lot of words. What it means, so a simpler way of putting that is don't treat people, not yourself, not anybody else, don't treat people as if they were merely means to your ends, as if they didn't matter in themselves. Okay, what does it mean to treat somebody merely as a means to an end? That's a little bit complicated. Kant doesn't think it's wrong to treat somebody as a means to an end. Full stop. I would disagree with that. I think Marx actually, at his best, right? I mean, obviously, I wouldn't defend the first 3 chapters of Capital for their prose, but at his best, Marx has his moments. Like some parts of Marx are actually great writing. It's just that parts of them are sleep aids, but parts are actually really good writing. Yeah, and Engels obviously, but look, so what's Kant actually doesn't think it's wrong to treat people as means to an end. Nobody thinks that. That would be an insane view. Thinking that it's wrong to treat people as means to an end would mean that that if I got Kant's book, The Groundwork, The Metaphysics of Morals, at a Barnes & Noble, that I was doing something wrong to the cashier as a Barnes & Noble, because when she rang up my book, I wasn't talking to her because I was deeply interested in her as a human being. I was talking to her because I was using her as a means to an end to get the book. Everybody constantly uses each other's means to an end. The only way to avoid that is to live like a hermit out in total isolation from other people. That's fine, right? But it's wrong to treat people merely as means to an end. So like a quick, dumb, probably simplistic, but it vividly gets the idea across way of illustrating the distinction is that you get, thank you so much for the super chat. McMindfulness, Who Moved My Cheese, says, is Ludwig von Mises the link between Nietzsche and Ayn Rand? Businessman is Ubermensch, Hillsdale College, what's wrong with Michigan? Fair. Hillsdale's obviously a den of reactionary lunatics, but we also have big state colleges that have educated lots of working class people. Some of them have employed socialists, like my late friend Vic Pananen, who was an English professor at Michigan State and a really big part of socialist politics in mid-Michigan in like the 90s. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that much about von Mises, so I don't want to try to speak to that too much, but I think there is something to the businessman is Ubermensch thing. I think if you read Corey Robin, he has some interesting things to say about this. Also, in defense of Michigan, read my last article in Jacobin, how the left beat Trump in Michigan, about how unsung heroes like Abdul al-Sayed and Rashida Tlaib did more than the official Biden campaign did in some ways to stop Trump from winning the state again, like he did in 2016. So, defense of Michigan. Okay, so quick, dumb way of illustrating the difference between treating somebody as a means to an end and treating them merely as a means to an end is think about like sometimes, like if I'm teaching this in like a face-to-face class before the pandemic. If I was holding like a cup of like Starbucks coffee, or actually it'd be better if it was like a bottle of water, right? If I was holding a bottle of water, I might be, von Mises Is that how you say that? Von Mises? I'm never sure if I'm saying that right. Archives are located at Hillsdale. That sounds right to me. Uh, so, yeah, of course, I know Hughes also praised fascism, or at least said it was a necessary stopgap against the threat of communism. So, always love those libertarians with their consistent defense of freedom. So, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I could do a whole thing about the water issues in northern Michigan, but yeah, if I'm holding up a bottle of water, I could be like, okay, look, here are two ways you could get this bottle of water. You could get it from a vending machine, or you could go, maybe if like there's a convenience store downstairs in the building I'm teaching in, right? You could get it from that convenience store downstairs. If you got it from the vending machine and it did that thing where the vending machines sometimes do, where the bottle came out part way and got stuck and it didn't come out, in your frustration, yes, fuck Nestle, amen to that. In your frustration, you might, like swear, you might go as far as to bang the side of the vending machine to try to get it out. Whereas if you bought the bottle of water at a convenience store, no matter how much trouble your cashier was having with your order, you wouldn't curse at them or hit them, because the vending machine is literally merely a means to the end of getting the bottle of water, whereas the person matters in themselves. They aren't merely a means to an end. It's okay to use them as a means to an end, not merely as a means to an end. That's the intuitive distinction, at least, that Kant is making. And that's also the reason it would be wrong to push the man onto the tracks in the trolley problem, because even though your end is really good, you're trying to save 5 people's lives, you're reducing a person to a mere means to the end of saving those 5 people. Okay, so all of which is to say, yeah, John, that picture behind me, that's me and my wife Jennifer and Michael Brooks and Michael's longtime partner, live-in girlfriend Theodora. That was actually the last time I saw him in person. I was crashing on his couch in Brooklyn over the weekend. My wife was hanging out with a friend of hers in New Jersey. I was obviously doing that last TMBS live show before the pandemic. We all got together for lunch on the last day, and that was taken about 30 seconds before I hugged him goodbye for what turned out to be the last time. Obviously, talked to him about 1 million times after that, but that was the last time I saw him in person. So yeah, that's why I keep that there. But thank you, Thomas. I'm sorry, I don't know what's wrong with me today. Anyway, yeah, sorry. Look, so to go back to my hot take on Kant, I think that my hot take, like short enough could fit into a tweet, would be that I think that Hume is right about what morality is. But Kant, at least in the Formula of Humanity version of the categorical imperative, is latching on to something important about what morality requires. Right? So I think Hume is right when he says it's all categorical imperatives. There's no deep metaphysical fact about what's morally right or wrong. It's all just about which moral goals you care about. And what we're doing when we reason and argue about morality is we're trying to decide, okay, if we care more, okay, we care about this, but maybe we care more deeply about this goal. How can we make the two consistent? That's what we're doing when we argue about morality. But as far as I think the goals that most of us do care about and what would be rationally ways of pursuing them, I think Kant gets at an important part of what morality requires. I'm not an absolutist like Kant is. Kant held crazy positions, like if there's a murderer at the door asking where somebody is, you can't lie to them, right? But I do think that this business about reducing people to merely a means to your ends is, like, I think that gets at something important about morality. And I think it applies to a lot of political questions. I think that that's the difference between starting a business where everybody's going to have an equal say, right, as a worker cooperative, or starting one where most of the people who do all the work to enrich you don't get a vote. That in both cases you're using people's means to an end to get some project going, but in one case you're reducing them to merely a means to an end. And in fact, I think that that's how I think about, and that's not to say that you're an evil person if you start a small business, any more than back when we had coverture in marriage, where a lot of the wife's legal rights were subsumed to the husband. That like every man who got married was a monster. I don't believe in that kind of moralism, but I think that we can moral evaluate institutions without morally judging people who participate in existing institutions, and. If you're talking about Bilbo's Pizza, I love that place. There used to be one in East Lansing. There's still one in Kalamazoo. But yeah, this is kind of what Marx was getting at when he talked about reducing, the worker to an appendage of flesh to a machine of steel. And I think you can, without morally judging people for just living their lives and getting married and starting businesses and doing their thing in society as it exists, we can have a moral critique of the structure of that society. And I think that'd be very Kantian. And similarly, even on abortion rights, and this finally gets back to that long-delayed question about bodily autonomy, I think that one of the most powerful arguments for abortion rights is essentially Kantian, that if you want to legally require somebody to stay pregnant for 9 months, you are essentially reducing her to merely the level of a means to the end of creating new life, that she doesn't matter as a person in herself because you can force her to do that. That like you're reducing a human being essentially to a walking incubator. Even if you say, oh, it's not that, it's that I care about the babies. It's like, yeah, but you don't care about this person in herself, at least not enough to care about her bodily autonomy, which finally brings us back to that. Oh, John, Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, a critique of the contemporary left, is released at the end of April. It sucks that the wait is that long, but sometimes book publishing is like that. Certainly going to be talking about that a lot more and promoting a lot more when we get closer. All right, bodily autonomy. Well, this gets back to the point about Hume that, of course, I think that if I always think about this scene in South Park. Yeah, you see it on my shelf, but that's an author copy. It's not actually released until the spring. I'm sorry. Again, yeah, look, I think that there's a scene in South Park that I always think of when I think about Hume and the stuff we were talking about earlier. It's the toilet paper episode from one of the early seasons when Stan, Kyle, and Eric Cartman have did this toilet paper in, and their friend Butters got blamed for it, and he's getting punished. And Stan and Kyle start feeling bad about it, and they say, we're thinking about turning ourselves in because we feel bad. And they say, and Cartman says, but I don't understand. We're not going to get away with it. And they say, yeah, but we still feel bad. And he's like, what? I don't know. Huh? You feel bad? And he's like, but we're going to get away with it. We're not going to get in trouble. Somebody else is going to be blamed. And they said, yeah, Cartman, that makes us feel worse. And he's like, I don't understand. And they say, Eric, we feel bad for other people. And he just looks at them like he's mystified by what they're talking about. And I always think about that when I think about this stuff, because I think when you get down to the really basic values like bodily autonomy, if somebody says, I just don't care about that, there might come a point in the conversation where there's just nothing more to say, right? It's like if you say, oh, people are starving to death, we should have some sort of food program, and somebody says, oh, I don't care that people are starving to death, I only care about myself. There comes a point in the conversation where reasoning has sort of hit its limits. There's nothing more you can say to this person. You can only fight with them, right? To try to stop them from enacting their terrible preferences. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of libertarian politics in there, but there's some very funny stuff in there too. I think they have their moments. So look, I think when it comes to vaccines and quarantine, I think there is a case you can make for for saying that autonomy needs to be limited by other values, but that's consistent with still very deeply caring about autonomy and thinking that there are things that we can demand that people do, to protect other people's lives, like wear a damn mask when you go out in public during a unprecedented global pandemic. But asking somebody to wear a mask, that's a very mild violation of your personal right to control your own life as you see fit. Whereas forcing somebody to literally share their body with another being for 9 months is about the profoundest violation of autonomy that you could possibly imagine. And if you were, the question 255 AD was asking is, okay, but if you're talking to like an alien or somebody who just never heard of this concept, they didn't understand why they would care about it. Well, I think the best you could do is by giving them examples to sort of really vividly show them the intuition. And if they still didn't care about it, then maybe you'd say, okay, these aliens just have very deeply different values than us. So one example you could give is the Judith Jarvis Thompson sick violinist example. You're kidnapped and hooked up to you're kidnapped by the Society of Music Lovers, and you're hooked up to this famous sick violinist, and you're the only person who has the blood tape or whatever. Fill out the details however you want. Somehow or another, you're hooked up to him. Philosophy Tube, I think is the name of the channel, did a good video on this, illustrated this, and yeah. So I think that the and you're told, okay, you can separate yourself from the sick violinist, but if you do, they'll die. Should you have to stay hooked up? Of course, it'd be very admirable if you stay hooked up, but the idea that you should have to seems crazy to most people, which is why most pro-life people, when they're responding to this thought experiment, they don't say, oh no, you should have to stay hooked up to the sick violinist. They say, here's why that's not really the same thing as pregnancy, which shows that even they start with the premise that bodily autonomy is very important, because they agree that in this scenario, it would actually be so important, it would override the violinist's right to life. Very similarly, in the G.A. Cohen, the great Marxist analytic philosopher, maybe my favorite 20th century philosopher in some ways, has this great example, and he's like, one of the things Cohen is doing throughout his, he spends a lot of his oeuvre doing is arguing against libertarians, which is why I like him so much, because I'm a big arguing against libertarianism guy. But there's a point where he's giving the libertarian their due, and he's saying, look, when libertarians say you at least own yourself, surely that's right. Or at least if it's wrong, it's a little counterintuitive that it'd be wrong. And the reason that he gives for this is he's got this thought experiment, the eyeball lottery. Like, let's say someday in the future, we got really, really good. Yes, I do think utilitarianism lacks concern for autonomy, and this is something that makes utilitarianism less plausible. I was actually thinking earlier I might do a stream sometime with my friend Neil Sinababu, who's a philosophy professor who is a utilitarian, who's written about it, and that might be a fun discussion. But anyway, yes, everybody should read G.A. Cohen. I agree. So the eyeball lottery, right? Thought experiment. The idea is that at some point in the future, medical technology gets to the point where we're really, really good at curing blindness by transplanting healthy eyeballs into the eye sockets of blind people, and so we have it in our power to completely eliminate blindness. But here's how: we institute a lottery like the draft lottery during the Vietnam War, where everybody whose birthday, came up, they literally had like a goldfish bowl with, the birthdays in it, and everybody whose unlucky number came up had to go register at the draft office the next day. So we did a lottery like that for eyeball transplants, where every person with 2 healthy eyeballs if their unlucky number came up, they had to have one of those 2 eyeballs transplanted against their will to the eye socket of a blind person. And of course, in a lot of ways, this fits a lot of Rawlsian considerations about fairness. Everybody has an equal shot. Look, nobody should deserve to be blind just because they were unlucky enough to be born blind. Everybody has an equal shot at getting the eyeball. Nevertheless, Cohen, as a Marxist, as somebody who's criticizing libertarian, thinks it's obvious that instituting the eyeball lottery would be very deeply morally wrong. So it'd be a profound violation of autonomy. And I agree with him, right? And that's my best argument, thinking about examples like this. If that doesn't stoke the intuition that bodily autonomy is important, we just have very fundamentally different values. And I'm not sure, unfortunately, what else there is to say about it. But I also have to go now because that online film festival I mentioned, links are in the description. The chunk with my brother's short film is starting, and I want to watch that and vote for it. Very proud of him, really looking forward to that. Structural adjustment says we see eye to eye on this issue. That's left, absolutely. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. I'm going to be doing that that debate on the live stream with Nick Manley about Ayn Rand's philosophy. So look forward to that at 5 p.m. EST. Left is best.